L'kuta Sichis Chelek Chav Ches, the Sicha of Yud Beis Yud Gimmel Tammuz, Lilu Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. On Yud Beis Tammuz, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was informed of his impending release from exile in Kastarama, what was his first reaction? A very powerful lesson and a exploration into the story of Yud Beis Tammuz. Wie bewusst ist die Geule von Kedushes Mervachami Admur von sein Verschickung gewähnt bei Yud Beis Yud Gimmel Tammuz, as it is known, the release of the Frierdiker Rebbe from his exile in Kastarama took place on Yud Beis and on Yud Gimmel Tammuz. And the Rebbe explains, Dienstig Yud Beis Tammuz hat man dem Rebbe Media gewähnt, als es ist angekommen, die Pkude ihm zu befreien von der Verschickung in Kastarama. On Tuesday, the 12th of Tammuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe was notified that an order came in to release him from his exile in Kastarama. Then Azevi in Yenim Tag is dort der Misrad von der Memshala gewesen geschlossen. But on that day, the office of the government was closed. Das ist gewesen a Chagetag. It was a legal holiday. Hat man die Tuuda Shichrur gegeben dem Rebbe auf morgen Mittwoch et Gimmel Tammuz. So the documents of his release were only given to him the next day, on Wednesday, the 13th of Tammuz. Now, gleich bei Yud Beis Tammuz hat der Rebbe gesagt, am Eimer Chassidus auf dem Pasuk, Havayli be'ezroi, va'ani ere besoinoi. On Yud Beis Tammuz, immediately after receiving the news that he was going to be released, even though he didn't get his documents yet till the next day, the Frierdiker Rebbe said a mimer on the Pasuk, Hashem was among my helpers, and I will see, or Hashem is amongst my helpers, and I will see the downfall of my enemies. And on the following day, after he was actually released, and the next day, after actually being released, the Frierdiker Rebbe said another mimer, Baruch HaGemel, blessed is the Eibishter who performs acts of kindness, who has been kind to me. Now, the Teichen from Pasuk of Aili be'ezeri ve'ere b'seinei, the Pasuk Hashem is amongst my helpers, and I should see the downfall of my enemies, is seemingly a request that is for the future. That we're asking Hashem that since Hashem is helping me, I should be able to see the downfall or the nekama, the revenge, the vengeance against my enemies. Whereas the pasuk, blessed is Hashem who has performed acts of kindness for me, is as a thank you and a praise to Hashem, often over on the past of them was Gemolani Toiv, for the fact that he has already performed kindness for me. Is in plugidit verstandig, and that's the case, then this seemingly is not understood. Seemingly, when a person receives the good news that he's going to be released, he's going to be saved from his current situation, when first and foremost, you should thank Hashem for what he has done for him. And only afterwards is there room to be able to ask for the future. So it would have been seemingly more appropriate that the first mimer should be Baruch HaGemel, thank you Hashem for performing kindness with me, and only later to ask Hashem for the future. So the Rebbe is asking a simple question. Seemingly, the first mimer was about the future. The second mimer was about a thank you for the past. And why shouldn't the Frierdiker Rebbe first thank Hashem for what he has done for him and only then ask for the future? But maybe in a more difficult way, you could say, since on Yud Beis Tammuz, when the Frierdiker Rebbe heard the news, he couldn't actually make the bracha HaGemel. Since he had not yet been actually released. Certainly he was not in a situation where he was totally out of danger, and therefore he would have had to wait. He would have to wait to make the bracha. And that's why, since he can't make the real bracha HaGemel at the Sefer Torah, he didn't either want to say a maimer with the words Baruch HaGemel. Maybe that's the pshat. but as Father Zechbir says the Rebbe, this doesn't really satisfy, and still explanation is necessary. It's obvious that even the very news of his release deserves, even if you can't make the bracha Gimmel, it still calls for thanking Hashem. The Maimer could have been connected with another expression of thanks and praise to Hashem, and the fact that he can't make a Gimmel yet, so he doesn't want to say the bracha Baruch the Dibra Maschel Baruch Gimmel, so say another pasuk. I don't know, the Rebbe doesn't say that in the Sikha, but I'm saying use other words of thanks to Hashem. And still, it still doesn't answer our question that certainly the thanks to Hashem, the gratitude to Hashem, should have come before the request. Certainly a quest to be able to see the downfall of the enemy, which isn't even relevant to the Frierdiker Rebbe's own release. It's sort of a bonus. So the first thing that should have been the thanks to Hashem. So the Rebbe is asking the question on the Frierdiker Rebbe's choice of Maimer. Why is it that the Frierdiker Rebbe doesn't begin with the first Maimer with a thank you to Hashem? And see if Beis, the Rebbe is going to introduce another detail that is relevant to the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe's release, and he's going to point out a question, and as we'll see inside, the Rebbe is going to ask, how is it possible that nobody of the people who tried helping the Frierdiker Rebbe was actually harmed by their efforts? And ultimately, the Rebbe is going to say that this question, the answer to this question, is connected to the Maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe says on Yud Beis Tammuz. In general, in addition to the fact that the very release of the very redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe was a great miracle, that but in the course of the story there are smaller miracles or individual miracles that take place that don't necessarily get proper coverage. There's a certain, amongst the various different miracles that are connected to the Frierdiker Rebbe's release, there's one event or one incident that at the time we didn't really focus on it. But now, many years later, this Sikha is Tafshin Chavav, so you're talking about almost 40 years after the story, and now we're seeing it more from a more tranquil space. But we realize that this in truth was a great miracle, an incredible miracle, that has no basis in the natural order of things. And this is as follows. The Seder in Medina is because in the time that Rebbe is saying the Sikha, it was still current. As the Teshri Medina that the citizens of that country, of course referring to the country of Russia, are strongly monitored by the government. This goes on till today. And certainly in that time, especially something that's connected to the arrest of the Frierdiker Rebbe, at which time a double, triple search and investigation was done. And there was any person that was somewhat connected to the Frierdiker Rebbe was monitored and followed with in quotes with 7 eyes, which means to say with a very, very detailed watch. Nevertheless, as soon as it became known that the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested, there were tens of people that threw themselves into various different efforts and activities to be able to free the Friedrich Rebbe. Und haben sich nicht gerechnet damit, was sie werden nachgespürt. And they did not take into consideration the fact that they were being followed. Aber nicht geguckt auf die zakanistische Tezois für seinen damit verbunden, and they did not take into consideration the dangerous repercussions that could actually happen for being involved in the efforts to release the Friedrich Rebbe. And they did this openly. And they even sent letters including their names. Wenden sich allein in die Amten, welche seinen gewend verantwortlich für Psak Din. They actually themselves went into the offices of the high government officials who had the authority over this psak din, over this verdict, and tried, endeavored to influence them to release the Friedrich Rebbe. So besides for the Pella itself, besides for the wondrous element that these people invested themselves into the release of the Friedrich Rebbe without looking at the danger that they were putting themselves in, but we see an even greater Dvar Pella. Amongst all those people that put in these efforts, is nit given kein ein und einziger. There was not one person that was harmed in any way by this. Not on a spiritual level, not on a physical level, not even on a financial level. Those people that risked their lives to involve themselves in the release of the Friedrich Rebbe did not suffer any form of harm because of their involvement. Emes is the other kalash luche mitzvah in Nizek, and it's true that there's a rule in Gemara that those who are emissaries of a mitzvah, those who are involved in the fulfillment of a mitzvah, do not get harmed. Zogt aber the Gemara zeiche de shchicha zeikes garandis, but the Gemara says that in a case where the harm is common, where harm is easy to come by, then not necessarily does this rule apply. And for these people that were involving themselves in the release of the Friedrich Rebbe, this was the very definition of shchicha zeike. Harm was right there waiting for them. In the full intent of the word and beyond. Unachman is their pella. And the surprise, the wonder is even greater. In the Misman Kaidam Meiser, in the time period before the Friedrich Rebbe was arrested. In other words, there was a whole period from Tafrish Pei, maybe even before that, but certainly from when the Friedrich Rebbe became Rebbe until he was arrested, where the Friedrich Rebbe was leading the effort in the underground to keep the flame of Yiddishkeit alive in Russia. And also after the arrest, there were people, or people that were involved with the Friedrich Rebbe, and it caused them physical harm. Some of them were killed, some of them were sent to exile, into forced labor. Chassidim suffered. Yidden who were involved with the Friedrich Rebbe suffered terribly in the time before the Meiser, in the time after the Meiser. On a spiritual level, certainly their involvement with the Friedrich Rebbe elevated them beyond anything that could be imagined. But on a practical, physical level, the Chassidim in Russia that were involved in the Friedrich Rebbe's endeavors, they suffered. But when it comes specifically to the release of the Friedrich Rebbe and the efforts towards his release, nobody was harmed by this. Even during the arrest, before the miracle happened, when the Friedrich Rebbe was still in danger of the worst possible verdict. At that time, the danger was still full force. And certainly after the Geula, and even later on, even after the Friedrich Rebbe left Russia, so you could say that maybe now the Russians could take revenge on those people that tried to help. But we find that there was no harm done to any of the people who were involved in the efforts to free the Friedrich Rebbe. Ulehisif in Seif Gimmel, the Rebbe says that to just elaborate a little bit on the Pella, on the extreme wonder of this detail, is the fact that some of these people were not even necessarily deserving of it, so to speak. The Rebbe references Sefer HaTeilis, of the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he tells the story. There's a very short chapter there, excuse me, where he says how immediately there were meetings. First, there was a meeting in Leningrad, not far from the Frierdiker Rebbe's house, and then they sent off someone to Moscow. In Moscow, there were meetings, and in those meetings, the people that were involved were not necessarily Chassidim. There were people that were not even necessarily frum that were involved in those meetings. And they went to certain professors and certain people who had any type of influence. They involved a lot of people who would have to risk their lives, even though in their day-to-day life, they weren't Chassidim and they weren't even necessarily observant Jews. Lahesif, as an aprat is their nes, no kreste with the nes al gul atzma. In a certain way, in a certain sense, this miracle is even greater than the miracle of the release. Even focusing on it from the perspective of the natural order of things. Even though it's obviously clear that the Frierdiker Rebbe's release was an open miracle, but it had some basis in nature. There were efforts, using natural means of efforts were invested by people of great influence in der Medina Atzma, within Russia and from outside of Russia. There was a lot of pressure that was on the Russian government and from people with great influence to release the Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, at least you could say, there was a lot of pressure on Russia, and therefore they buckled to the pressure. It's still a miracle, but at least there's some form of a natural order of things that could explain it. However, those who put in the efforts for the Frierdiker Rebbe, especially those that went on their own into the offices and into the highest offices of the land to request the Frierdiker Rebbe's release. Logically speaking, there's no explanation that this shouldn't cause them harm. That the Russians should not say, okay, this person is connected with Schneerson and therefore needs to be punished or needs to suffer the consequences. This is on a gasmistic approach, that the Frierdiker Rebbe at least had the backing of the international efforts. The little chassid or the little Jew or the little person that went into the office and said, please, he didn't have that backing, and yet he wasn't harmed. Also from a spiritual perspective, says the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe's release was certainly connected with his merits. The fact that he sacrificed his life to spread Torah and Yiddishkeit in Russia. Kasher mitzchus aves. He also had the schus of his ancestors, the Rebbes and the Rebbitzins that came before him. And of course, the Frierdiker Rebbe had his many other merits. And even with all those merits, the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't come until after he experienced great pains. And he had to actually sit in jail for a few weeks. The Ali Yisurim was gelitten dort with all of the sufferings that he experienced there. And even after that, he wasn't released right away. He was sent off to Kastrama. So with all of the schusim that the Frierdiker Rebbe had, he still had to experience jail, and he still had to experience the suffering. Whereas those who put in the efforts for the Frierdiker Rebbe, including those that in other matters of Torah mitzvahs did not sacrifice their lives to be a Frum Yid in Russia at the time. Even those people that in their own personal lives were not Torah or mitzvah observant. They belong to the various different parties and isms that existed at that time. And nevertheless, despite the fact that in their own personal life they didn't have any major schusim, their conduct did not bring out their merits, and yet they were not harmed. It all went through in a very smooth way. So this is an incredible nace that's not understandable. the fact that all of the people, every last person, as the Rebbe says it, that was involved in the Friedrich Rebbe, in the efforts to release the Friedrich Rebbe, did not suffer any repercussions from their involvement, despite the fact that Al Piseichel, anybody that was connected to a Schneerson, anybody that was connected to the Friedrich Rebbe was in trouble, and the government certainly knew about it because they were monitoring and they were following everybody, every single citizen, certainly those that were connected to the Friedrich Rebbe. In Sifdal, the Rebbe is going to say that it is this mimer that the Friedrich Rebbe says on Yud Beis Tammuz that addresses this issue. That the Friedrich Rebbe is asking that those people that were involved in his release should not suffer the consequences. That the Rebbe accomplished this, or explained this, or both, this is what the Friedrich Rebbe accomplished and clarified by saying this Maimer Hashem Avaya Liba Ezrei. Gleich in Anid Maimer stellt sich the Rebbe. It's a full Maimer. It's 7 pages in the Sefer HaMaamarim. But the Rebbe will give us a few glimpses into the Maimer, and each of those will tell us what the Friedrich Rebbe was accomplishing by saying this Maimer. So the Rebbe begins by saying that in the beginning of the Maimer, the Friedrich Rebbe, focuses on the words Havaya Liba Oizroi, which literally means Hashem was for me with my helpers, or amongst my helpers. When fragt, and the Friedrich Rebbe asks, at first glance, is mashma, it seems, that the pasuk is implying that a person has a lot of helpers. Hashem is one of them. But the Friedrich Rebbe continues to ask that in truth, as ein oid milvadei, there's nothing besides for Hashem. V'raku levadei hu yizbarach abeda, the Eibishter is the sole creator. V'oizulei b'chalash alei, and the sole helper who helps the Yid in everything that he needs. The Rambam says, the Rambam says right in the beginning of Rambam, that the pillar of all, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of wisdom, that there is one original entity, and all other existences only derive from the essence, from the truth of the Eibishter's existence, which basically means that nothing exists in this world other than the Eibishter. So how can you say that there's many different helpers if really everything is from Hashem? That's the question of the Friedrich Rebbe in the beginning of the Maimer. When in Sof Maimer for the Rebbe, this will be relevant later on in the Sikha also. The end of the Maimer, the Friedrich Rebbe answers his own question. As Oizroi koye la birurim am izbaredim shema oizrim amitim shaladam. Oizroi doesn't literally mean the person has a lot of helpers. It means that when the person goes into the world and elevates the world, those parts of the world that he elevated or refined or was mevarer, they become his helpers. They strengthen him to be able to keep on going. Just like we say, Chazal tell us that a person's students are called his sons, his children, which basically means that through teaching someone Torah, that person becomes his son or his child, which a child, besides for everything else, also supports the father, helps the father. So Avayali ba'Oizrei means, what does Oizrei mean? Oizrei means the help that the person gets through the birurim that he accomplishes in this world. What does it mean? Hashem was to me with my helpers. As mispayil, as gamba, oizrim yiyakilu shem havaya. Havaya li ba'oizrim means that in those helpers, in those birurim, there should be the revelation of shem havaya, of the name of Hashem. So in the very beginning of the Maimer, the Rebbe Friedrich asked the question, what does it mean that there's a lot of helpers, seemingly Hashem is the only helper? And in the end, Taka doesn't mean that a person is relying on other people or things to help him. Hashem is the sole helper. But when a person does what Hashem wants him to do and affects this world, those positive effects, they come back to support him, to help him, and he then can reveal the name of Hashem in those birurim. So this is a little tiny glimpse into the Maimer. V'yesh leimer, says the Rebbe. As the Mita the Rebbe gewollt euch areis geben a psak din von Torah. With this, the Friedrich Rebbe was giving a verdict, a Torah verdict, and it was being delivered in the context of a piece of Torah. A Maimer Chassidus Pnimius of Torah was in a Maimer, was a Maimer of Chassidus, which Chassidus is called the wisdom of truth, or the true wisdom. And so this verdict was with Binigea the Aleph of sich with regards to all those people that were involved in his release. Even though that at first glance it seems that they were his helpers, they were helping a person even though for themselves they were placing themselves in a state of danger. And therefore they would need incredible merits in order to be saved, especially being saved in a way that there should be no remnant, no effect that should remain on them. So Friedrich Rebbe is saying that despite the fact that so many people were involved, and one might say, wow, look at these people, they were helping out the Friedrich Rebbe, and they were putting themselves in danger, and therefore they need schusim to be able to be saved, is over. The MS says the Friedrich Rebbe, the truth is, as ein id milvadei, there's nothing besides for Hashem, v'raku levadei yizbarach habeireh ve'ezelei. The Eibishter is the sole creator and the sole force that helps this person. That's the gewended ezer nar von hu levadei hu. The help that brought the Friedrich Rebbe to a point of his release was solely from the Eibishter and from nothing else. In dem Fall is gestanden begolui as idea miras a maimer, and das is blazer ezer von ulevadihu. By saying the maimer, the Friedrich Rebbe was revealing the fact that only the Eibishter's efforts got him released. And this concept that everything is from the Eibishter was actually seen, it was actually expressed in the helpers themselves. Die alle, was man sich bestadelig von Rebben, haben das nicht getan mit einem äußerst gerechten Cheshbon und Sikuyim Sichlium. All those people that invested themselves in releasing and helping release the Friedrich Rebbe, it wasn't like they had a mapped out plan. You read in Sefer HaTeilis how they had different ideas and they didn't know what would work, what wouldn't work. Certainly, Al Piseichel, they didn't have great hopes. No, jeder von sie hat sich meise Nefesh given und sich nicht gerechnet mit keinem zum Sach. Every one of them was risking their lives without taking anything into consideration. Misgegangen auf alle sakanistische Wege, they took every dangerous road. Efsher wird man alkoponim verleichten in the Meiser, oder viel zu offen to the Gula, if only they can make it a little bit easier or actually help bring closer to the redemption, to the release. Und der Rebbe hat das Metzias der Teves Makim given, and therefore their existence did not count. Und in Zeira Pulis hat sich gekent der Rüsag and Begalit, das ist nicht Zeira Ezer, and in their very efforts it was very clear that it wasn't their help. That das ist von Hu Levadi Yud, das tut der Eibishter. In other words, in this last two paragraphs, the Rebbe is saying that the fact that the people didn't make their own cheshbonus is because they were tools of the Eibishter. They were doing the Eibishter's work. If a person is operating on his own efforts, then you have to ask yourself: is it worth it? Is maybe the danger, not worth the chance of something happening? And certainly, you have to have a plan, and a plan that makes sense. But when you're working in the employ of the Eibishter is bringing the Geula through you, then your Metzias is not Tefes Makim. Your Metzias doesn't matter. You do what you have to do with total Mesiris Nefesh, and the Eibishter will do what the Eibishter does. Is verstandige Pashtus. By was das hat keinen nicht geschat Eisen Schuh, feeling much better, and it's therefore understood very obviously now why nobody was harmed by this, even later on. Since the help was coming from the essence of the Eibishter, nobody could harm the Eibishter. The Eibishter is the one who accomplished this whole thing. Yes, through these Oizrim, but it was the Eibishter that was doing this, and nobody could harm the Eibishter. Noch mehr, when darf gar nicht ankommen zu einem Nest, das on the chatten, says al piteva umeglich tzonir damit sie matzei. You don't even need a miracle. Because according to the rules of nature, there's no way to touch the Eibishter. And since these people were the tools of the Eibishter, therefore, there is no way that anybody can get hurt. Truthfully speaking, says the Rebbe, they were not placing themselves in danger. Where you would need a great miracle to be saved. What was being done was the Eibishter was doing his thing. He was doing it through the efforts of so-and-so. Naturally speaking, it was the Eibishter's doing, and therefore there's no reason to fear that someone will get harmed because no one could harm the Eibishter. When I was learning the Sikha, I understood that since they didn't do anything, the Eibishter did it all. So why should they be harmed? But l'chayre, the vart is different than that. Being that the Eibishter is the one that did it through them, therefore the only repercussions kavayachol would be on the Eibishter. And since you can't harm the Eibishter, so therefore there's no room for harm. So this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying in the Maimer. Hashem li ba'ozroi. He was saying that although there were many people that were involved in my release, but Havaya li ba'ozroi. The truth is that the Eibishter is the sole helper and the sole force that brought this about. Yes, it came through the efforts of so and so, but they're einid muvadoi. They're nothing. They were just tools in the hands of the Eibishter, and therefore, since the Eibishter cannot be hurt or harmed, obviously, therefore, even al piteva, the people that were involved had no fear of. I mean, they were. I mean, we're seeing it lachar ha'maisa. There was no reason that they should be harmed because they were sachakol. They were working in the employ of the Eibishter. And Seifei, the Rebbe says that it doesn't mean that they don't get rewarded for it. In other words, you're going to say, 1 second, if Tzachakol Eibishter did everything, and they were just tools in the hands of Hashem, then why do they get rewarded? And the Rebbe is going to say, no, fakert. At the end of the day, the Eibishter does repay them. And we have to clarify. If that's the case, if the Eibishter did all the work, then they don't necessarily deserve any reward. Because the help that they gave was not associated with them. It was associated with Hashem, and there's nothing else besides Hashem. We know the rule. It says in Chazal that the Eibishter does not withhold the reward of anybody. And how much more so? That every single person that risks their life in the efforts for the release of the Rebbe and for the Geula, as charam is gargres. The reward is great. In other words, even though the actual Ezer is being attributed to Hashem, nevertheless, for all those that invested effort, they have great reward. And that's what the Rebbe is addressing in the end of the Maimer. Whereas we mentioned this earlier, the Rebbe will elaborate a drop more, that Oizrei refers to the Birurim, to those elements that the person through his avodah elevates or refines in this world. Das ist al derech wie steht in Mishnah as a eisa mitzvah keinali praklit. In Mishnah in Pirkei Avos it says that a person that does a mitzvah, he acquires for himself a defender. Von der mitzvah wird beschaffen a malach was helped him. That when a person does a mitzvah, it creates a malach that will help him later on. So too, when a person is mevarer birurim, when a person elevates the physicality of this world, that refined element actually comes to support the person in his avodah. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe adds, similar to the fact that Talmidim, that students are called children. What will be the connection between the idea that Talmidim are called children, students are called children, to the idea of Hashem being amongst my helpers? The edliche Werter is the Rebbe Madgish. But with these words, the Frierdiker Rebbe is emphasizing, as their Pirus from Be'ozrei bleibt euch kipsutoi, that Be'ozrei has to be also understood literally, even though we just explained that Be'ozrei means that Hashem did everything, and Be'ozrei means the birurim, that a person is mevarer, but you have to also understand this pasuk in the literal sense. As a Zainin Faran, Oizrim Rabim, that there are many helpers, including people that help literally. The Yidden the Yidden that help the Frierdiker Rebbe get out of jail. And with these efforts, these efforts, they became his students, they became his children. They seinen Oizrei, or wie bald as Idat Pchire Chavshis, und sie haben Becher gewinnt zu Tant in Jani Stadlos and Yidas free choice, and they made the choice to involve themselves in the efforts to free the Frierdiker Rebbe. Hasten they Oizrei, they are called helpers. And receive the full reward for this. So first we said that they're not really Oizrei, means that they can't suffer the consequences because the help is attributed to the Eibishter. But at the same time, when it comes to reward, they are the fact that they made the choice to be involved in this, they are considered helpers and they get the reward. V'afal pikein, it does not consider to them, seemingly it's a contradiction. If they did help, then they have to fear the consequences. If they didn't help, then why would they get rewarded? Says the Rebbe, no, it does not consider to them, was schreibt in Chalas HaMaimer, as ein oid milvad v'raku levadu yizbarach abede ve'ezer loi. It's not a contradiction to what the Friedrich Rebbe says in the beginning of the Maimer, that there's nothing else besides the Eibishter, and the Eibishter is the sole force that created the person and helps the person. Val says, Havaya li be'oizrei. V'yatayshna sef Maimer kanal, as in the Oizrim, so leichten dem Gilishim Havaya. Das heißt, as der Uftuer von dem Ezer is der Havaya, was is Meir in Oizrei. In the end of the Maimer, the Rebbe teaches that in the Birurim there is a Gili of Shem Havaya. So here the Rebbe explains that Havaya Liba Oizrei means that in the people that helped, there'll be the revelation of the name of Havaya, which means that initially we didn't really see that we didn't look at his help as help with regards to the fact that there might be consequences. We said everything comes from Hashem. But then Havaya Liba Oizrei, then the fact that they helped, this reveals the name of Havaya in them, and that's when they are worthy of reward. And now we go back to our original question. Why the Friedrich Rebbe started with this Maimer, not with the Maimer Baruch HaGimmel? Ados is echt der Tafel, was der Rebbe hat macht, mit gewinn sagen, the Maimer Havaya Liba Oizrei, fad the Maimer Baruch HaGimmel. This explains the reason why the Rebbe started with this Maimer, even though seemingly Baruch HaGimmel is for the past, and Havaya Liba Oizrei is for the future. Also, Alim Eshen Darfam Bavarin, in the first and foremost, the Friedrich Rebbe wanted to make sure, as from them Tev Shegmalani, that from the good that was given to him, that nothing negative should affect another person, certainly by those who were involved in the efforts of the release. Not only should they not be affected negatively, they should receive the full reward that they are deserving. And therefore, the Friedrich Rebbe hears this Pesuda that he was finally released. The first thing the Friedrich Rebbe does, he says, "Maimer Havaya Liba Oizrei," clarifying, number one, that the Eibishter is the sole Oizer, the sole helper that caused the release of the Friedrich Rebbe, and therefore nobody else that was involved in the efforts should be harmed by that. And at the same time, Havaya Liba Oizrei, that the Eibishter then becomes revealed in those people that helped the Friedrich Rebbe, and for that, or with that, they receive the reward and the full reward for their efforts, even though we didn't initially attribute the efforts to them. In the last two Eisis of the Maimer, the Rebbe is going to explain the second part of the pasuk. Havaya Liba Oizrei va'ani ere b'soinoi. The Rebbe is going to explain what is the meaning of this pasuk based on the Maimer of the Friedrich Rebbe. The Maimer an Abed Chilas nachdem wie der Rebbe stellt sich auf die Schalte Kasse Havaya Liba Oizrei, fragt der Rebbe in zweiten Teil pasuk when he ere b'soinoi, after the Friedrich Rebbe asks his questions on the beginning of the pasuk. Havaya Liba Oizrei, which we just learned about. The Friedrich Rebbe was asking, what does it mean that there's many helpers? And since we know that the Eibishter is the sole helper, the Friedrich Rebbe then asks a question on the pasuk when he ere b'soinoi. Why would we ask to see the downfall, to see the revenge on the enemies? The request should have been that the enemy should be transformed into friends, into close people. Why would we ask? Obviously, it's a pasuk in Tillim. But why would the pasuk ask that we want to see the downfall of the enemies instead of seeing the transformation of the enemies? When the Rebbe is Meis, when the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe the Maimer says, even though the hatred of David Melech was to those people who hate Hashem, the pasuk says that these are the people that hate Hashem. So the Friedrich Rebbe responds to that. But there's a pasuk in Tillim that says sin should be removed from this world. It says sin, not sinners. We want to get rid of sin, but not of the sinners. We want the sinners to do tshuva. So even though it's Soinei Hashem, but the question still remains. Let's get rid of the sins and let's transform the sinners. So what's tight of the words? Why is David Melech davening to see the downfall of his enemies and not the transformation of his enemies? We could say that with this question, the Frierdiker Rebbe is addressing another detail, another element with regards to his redemption. Which is also relevant even before you get to the Hagoimel, to the thank you to Hashem for the release. Not in Zweiten Ksei, and here the Frierdiker Rebbe is addressing the other extreme. Till now we were talking about the people that risk their lives to free the Frierdiker Rebbe or to be involved in the release of the Frierdiker Rebbe. How about the people on the other end of the extreme? Those that arrested the Frierdiker Rebbe and caused him pain, not only physical pain, but spiritual pain. They disturbed his serving of Hashem, especially when they put him into jail and the Frierdiker Rebbe was not able to do what he was doing before and after he was in jail. They are seemingly in the category of those who hate Hashem. I hate. When they're fired, and therefore it would make sense that after the victory of the Frierdiker Rebbe's release, the reaction to them should be that of, I want to see their downfall in the most literal sense. Not a personal vengeance. The vengeance for Hashem, because these are haters of Hashem. He says the Rebbe Sheilil Gleichen on the Maimer, so the Rebbe comes to negate that from the get-go in the very beginning of the Maimer. Even though people who hated the Frierdiker Rebbe who go into the category of they hate Hashem, but the request, note again, like in the question of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and that the Rebbe is learning a takeaway from the question of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Here too, the Rebbe is learning in the question from the Frierdiker Rebbe. The fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe is asking on the pasuk, why do I want the downfall of the enemy and not the transformation of the enemy? The Rebbe says this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying, that those people that hated the Frierdiker Rebbe and fought him and fought his efforts and got him arrested, the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying that the request should not be. This is in the question of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Is implying that what we should want is not to see the downfall of the enemy, but yitamu chatoim lechetim v'man darf mispalel zayin sha'achetim yasu tshuva. We have to daven that the chaitim, the sinners, should do tshuva. That instead of these people to be removed from this world, they should do tshuva. And thus is their kesher zwischen die zehn Jahren and pasuk. And now we can understand the flow of the pasuk. Shasman der head das is ein eid milvade v'raku levade hu yizbarach abede v'chulu. When you realize that there's nothing other than the Eibishter, and the Eibishter is the sole creator, says Havaya liba that the Eibishter is the helper, the one who caused the Frierdiker Rebbe to go out of jail. If you really truly understand this, dan der Hertman, dem emes ich bin jetzt zu sehen. Das was man leid von dem Seine ist nicht, weil hat in dem Epis HaKayach. Then the same thing applies to the enemy. The fact that we're suffering in the hands of the enemy is not because the enemy has power. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Igeres HaKedush, Hashem told him to curse. This is in Igeres HaKedush Chafei, where the Alter Rebbe is talking about Kol HaKayis Kilo Eved Zara. That if someone is angry, it's like Aved Zara. Because what are you angry at and who are you angry at? Really, everything that happens to you, even the negative things that happen to you, come from the Eibishter. So how could you be angry at something while believing in Hashem? If you're angry, it means you don't believe in Hashem. It's Aved Zara. And over there, the Alter Rebbe refers to this pasuk. That David Melech was talking about Shimi ben Gera. Shimi ben Gera cursed him. And David Melech says, Hashem told him to curse him. Says the Alter Rebbe, where do we see that Hashem told him to curse him? And the Alter Rebbe says in Igeres HaKedush, the very fact that Hashem gave him the life to live at that time and allowed him to say those words, it means that Hashem was telling him, Kalil. Therefore, there's no room. Und das ist der Rebbe Sheil und der Perish an Rebbe Sinai. This is what the Rebbe is trying to negate. Frierdiker Rebbe. There's no room for nekama. There's no room for anger and the need for vengeance. Even the negative things that happened came from the Eibishter. So right in the beginning of the Maimer, when in his very question, what's ties van the Rebbe Sinai, the Frierdiker Rebbe is clarifying that our attitude towards our enemies is not one of destruction, but one of of rehabilitation. We have to look at them and say, what can we do for Yitamu Chatoim V'Lechetim? How can we bring these enemies to tshuva? In first versteht jeder Teichel an Erde Besoinus. And Siv Zayin, the Rebbe is going to say, so what does the pasuk mean? It doesn't mean that we should want the downfall of the enemies. What does it mean? Zog the Rebbe in Sof Maimer, the Friedrich Rebbe says as follows, in the end of the Maimer. In order to reach the level of Re'iyah, in order to experience something from the perspective of vision, which is a much higher experience than through hearing and understanding. Like it says in Pirkei Avos, who is wise? He who sees what's going to happen. But Chassidus explains how a chacham is someone that sees it. Seeing is a much stronger experience than hearing. So in order to reach the experience of Ani Era, you want to see is only through experiencing adversity, only through the enemy. Das heißt, not only do our enemies not bring out within us a feeling of vengeance, of anger, when we realize that if we encounter an enemy, we encounter opposition, it's actually coming from above. When the stated is blaze ashliach, when Eibush Navaya Amarle, the other this opponent, this adversary is actually a shliach of Hashem. We try to utilize this experience. How can I apply it in my own service of Hashem? Until we could see clearly, till we can experience this opposition in a manner that it actually elevates our avodah. And then we're able to conclude that this experience was only a gift from Hashem to be able to push us to the next level of avodah, to reach the level of Re'iyah. In other words, until now we were serving Hashem at a level of Shmiyah. So it's there's a certain distance there. And Ani Ere, you want to reach the avodah of Re'iyah is dafke b'soinoi. Dafke when there's an enemy, when there's an adversary, and it brings out within us our strongest kaiches to overcome the enemy. We are able, that elevates us to a higher level. So the taich of Ani Ere b'soinoi, just like Havaya li ba'oizroi, it doesn't mean literally Hashem is amongst my helpers. It means that Hashem becomes revealed in those things that I was mevarer and ultimately are going to help me out. V'ani Ere b'soinoi, in order to reach the Re'iyah, I had to go through the experience of the adversaries, of the enemy. Davke noch dem, wie man der Herr Dominion von Havaya Liebe Israel, von Yere Besoine, Betachlis and Beide Pratim, and only after we truly internalize this pasuk in both aspects, Asai Benegia Israel, Asai Benegia Soine is outside in von Havaya Liebe Elim Mubadi, that whether the people that support me, or whether the people that fight me, are all really coming from Hashem, because nothing exists other than Hashem. Then the thanks to Hashem, the gratitude to Hashem, that can then come complete. As with the heart, vis is Gmalani for the Mishnah Lane, then we realize that Gmalani, that the kindness that was performed with me was Hashem Himself. Once we realize the Eined Milvade, we realize that everything is from Hashem, we then can say, Baruch HaGeimel Shegmalani Tov, the Eibishter Himself had performed this kindness with me. And it's come up in Tev Gali, and then this is drawn down into a revealed goodness. B'Lashon Rav, as the Friedrich Rebbe said wrote in the second Baruch HaGeimel, which was said on Shabbos, that Shabbos after the Friedrich Rebbe already came back to Leningrad, and after the Friedrich Rebbe actually made the bracha of HaGeimel, he said the Maimer Baruch HaGeimel, and he ends off the Maimer, the Gam Machziki HaTeira, Hey Me'usharim U'Mevarachim B'chol Tov, that also those that are in support of Teira, they are Me'usharim, they are content, U'Mevarachim, they are blessed B'chol Tov, in all forms of goodness. But you can only really truly experience this only after you've gone through the challenges of the Beis Asurim and the understanding the Havaya Liba Israel and the Vani Ere B'Seinai, and only then could you experience the Teva Nira V'Anigla and the Baruch HaGeimel Shegmalani Tov.